A giant boulder blocks a billionaire's driveway in a racist HOA plot. Watch justice unfold in this epic battle. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to catch our latest HOA dramas and community wins. I woke up that Tuesday morning in Oak Ridge Estates to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling outside my house, a noise so loud it shook me. Darius Carter, out of a deep sleep, and I thought maybe the city was doing road work. But when I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, my jaw dropped, because there, and right in front of my driveway, was a massive boulder, at least 10 feet tall, its jagged gray surface blocking my entire entrance. And I could see my sleek black Bentley parked on the street where I'd left it last night, now completely trapped, unable to get into my own garage. And as I stepped outside in my sweatpants and t-shirt, the humid Atlanta air hitting my face, I noticed a bright yellow notice taped to the boulder. The words Oak Ridge Estates HOA, Architectural Enhancement Project, printed in bold letters. Claiming this monstrosity was part of a new community landscaping initiative to elevate the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. And I felt my blood boil because I knew this wasn't about aesthetics. This was personal, and I didn't have to guess who was behind it, because there she was, Barbara Evans, the HOA president, standing across the street in her crisp green blazer, her arms crossed, a smug smile on her face as she watched me, her graying hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. And I marched over, my voice low but firm. "Barbara, what the hell is this? You can't just block my driveway. I can't even get my car in. This is my property." And her smile widened, her tone dripping with condescension as she replied, "Mr. Carter, this boulder is a community-approved architectural feature, part of our new design vision for Oak Ridge. We voted on it at the last HOA meeting, which you conveniently missed. And frankly, if you can't appreciate innovation, maybe you don't belong in a place like this." And I felt the sting of her words, because I knew what she meant by a place like this. I'd heard it in the whispers since I moved here 3 years ago. A black man in a mostly white, upscale neighborhood. Comments like, "He must be a rapper or something," or "How did he even afford that house?" And I'd kept my head down because I didn't want the attention. I was a billionaire, a tech mogul who'd built my fortune quietly through real estate investments and software startups. But I'd chosen to live here under the radar, keeping my wealth a secret so I could raise my daughter, Kyla, away from the spotlight. But now Barbara was pushing me too far, and I shot back. "Innovation. You call this innovation? This is harassment. I can't even get into my own house. You're breaking the law." And her eyes narrowed, her voice turning cold. "The law, Mr. Carter, the HOA has every right to enhance common areas, and your driveway happens to border one. Besides, we're just trying to maintain the standards of Oak Ridge, something I'm not sure you understand." And there it was, the racism I'd always sensed, now out in the open, her words a clear message. "You don't belong here because you're black." And I felt my fist clench, my heart pounding as I tried to keep my cool, because I knew losing my temper would only give her what she wanted. A reason to paint me as the angry black man she could use to justify her actions. So I took a deep breath, staring her down. "This isn't over, Barbara. You are going to move this boulder, or I'll make sure you regret it." And her laugh was sharp, cutting. "Oh, I'd love to see you try. Good luck finding anyone in this neighborhood to back you up." And as she turned to walk away, her heels clicking on the pavement, I saw a few neighbors peeking out their windows, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. And I knew I was on my own for now. But what Barbara didn't know was that I wasn't just any resident. I owned 40% of the land in Oak Ridge Estates, a fact I'd kept hidden through anonymous LLCs. And I wasn't going to let her get away with this, so I pulled out my phone, dialing my lawyer. My voice steady as I said, "Michael, I need you to look into the HOA's records. They just blocked my driveway with a giant boulder, and I'm not playing games anymore." And as I hung up, I looked at that boulder, a symbol of everything wrong with this neighborhood, the racism, the classism, the power trips, And I swore to myself I'd tear it down, not just for me, but for every person of color who'd ever been made to feel like they didn't belong here. Because this was my home, and I was going to fight for it, no matter what it took. But I had no idea then just how far Barbara would go to keep her power, or how this boulder would become the catalyst for a battle that would change Oak Ridge forever. When the boulder in front of my driveway became more than just an obstacle in the days that followed, it turned into a symbol of the deep-seated racism Darius Carter, had always sensed lurking beneath the polished surface of Oak Ridge Estates, and I could feel the weight of it every time I stepped outside my house. My movements restricted, my daily routine thrown into chaos, because I couldn't get my car into the garage. Couldn't even walk to my mailbox without climbing over the jagged edges of that monstrous rock. And I knew Barbara Evans had planned it that way. Her smug smile from that first morning still burned into my mind as I tried to go about my life. But Oak Ridge wasn't letting me off easy, because Barbara had wasted no time spreading her narrative, knocking on doors, posting in the neighborhood's online group, claiming I was the problem. A disruptive influence who didn't respect the community's vision. And I saw the post myself, a photo of the boulder with a caption that read, "New landscaping feature under attack by a resident who refuses to cooperate. Let's protect Oak Ridge's standards." And the comments below were a mix of support for her and outright prejudice. One neighbor writing, "I knew he'd cause trouble. People like him always do." And another adding, "If he doesn't like it, he can leave. This isn't the place for his kind." And I felt my chest tighten because I knew what they meant by his kind. They meant black. They meant anyone who didn't fit their narrow idea of what an Oak Ridge resident should be. And I wanted to fire back, to call them out on their racism. But I stopped myself, knowing that engaging online would only fuel their fire. So instead, I focused on the fight ahead, trying to live my life despite the boulder. But it wasn't easy, because I couldn't take Kyla to school without parking blocks away and walking her through the neighborhood, her small hand in mine as she asked, "Daddy, why won't they move the big rock? Don't they know it's in our way?" And I forced a smile, my voice gentle as I said, "They will, baby. Daddy's working on it. We just have to be patient." But inside I was burning, because I knew this wasn't just about me. It was about every person of color who'd ever been targeted in this neighborhood. And I started hearing stories from others, like Mrs. Jackson, a black grandmother down the street who'd been fined by Barbara for having too many visitors when her grandkids came over, or the Martinez family. A Latino couple who'd been forced to repaint their house because Barbara claimed their chosen color was too vibrant for Oak Ridge. And I realized I wasn't alone, so I started reaching out, knocking on doors, my voice low as I said, "I'm Darius. I'm dealing with the HOA too. They put a boulder in front of my house. I think we need to work together." And some, like Mrs. Jackson, nodded immediately, her eyes fierce as she said, "I'm in. Barbara's been after us for years. It's time someone stood up to her." While others, like the Martinezes, were hesitant, their voices trembling as they whispered, "We want to help, but we're scared. Barbara's got the whole neighborhood on her side." And I understood their fear, because I felt it too. The weight of being seen as the other in a place like this. But I also knew we couldn't let that fear stop us. So I kept digging, spending late nights with my lawyer, Michael, poring over HOA records he'd pulled from the county. And that's when we found it. A discrepancy in the budget. $50,000 allocated for landscaping improvements that matched the exact timing of the boulder's installation. But there was no invoice, no contractor listed, just a vague payment to an LLC called Oak Ridge Innovations. And I felt my pulse quicken, because I knew this was a lead. So I asked Michael to dig deeper, my voice urgent. "Find out who owns that LLC. I bet it's tied to Barbara. She's using our money to fund her vendetta." And he nodded. "I'm on it, Darius, but be careful. She's not going to take this lying down." And he was right, because the very next day, I got a certified letter from the HOA, a formal complaint accusing me of violating community standards by publicly defaming the board, threatening fines and legal action if I didn't cease my disruptive behavior. And I couldn't believe the audacity, because they were the ones who'd blocked my driveway. They were the ones breaking the law. But I also knew this was a scare tactic, Barbara's way of trying to silence me, and I wasn't going to let her. So I called Mrs. Jackson and the Martinezes, my voice firm. We're having a meeting at my place tomorrow night. We need to organize. We need to fight back. And as I hung up, I looked out my window at that boulder, the sun setting behind it, casting a long shadow over my lawn. And I thought about all the years I'd stayed quiet, hiding my wealth, my power, just to live a simple life with my daughter. But now I knew that silence wasn't an option anymore, because Barbara wasn't just coming for me. She was coming for everyone who didn't fit her idea of what Oak Ridge should be, and I wasn't going to let her win. But what I didn't know then was that my next move would change everything, because I was about to reveal a secret that would turn Oak Ridge upside down, a secret Barbara never saw coming, and it would set the stage for a battle that would expose her for who she really was. The tension in Oak Ridge Estates had been simmering for days, but that Thursday evening at the HOA meeting, it finally boiled over. And I, Darius Carter, knew it was time to drop the bomb I'd been holding on to, because I was done playing nice, done letting Barbara Evans and her cronies treat me like an outsider in my own home. So I walked into the community center, my suit pressed sharp, my daughter Kyla's words echoing in my mind. Daddy, why won't they move the big rock? And I knew I had to do this for her, for us, for every person of color who'd ever been pushed around in this neighborhood. And the room was packed, over 60 residents seated in rows, whispering among themselves as Barbara stood at the podium, her green blazer as crisp as ever, her voice dripping with fake concern as she addressed the crowd. We're here to discuss the ongoing issue with Mr. Carter's refusal to accept our community's landscaping project. The boulder in front of his home is a vital part of Oak Ridge's aesthetic vision, and his complaints are disrupting our harmony. And I could feel the eyes on me, some curious, some hostile. Neighbors I'd lived among for years, but who'd never really seen me. And I stood up, my voice steady, cutting through her speech. Barbara, let's stop with the lies. That boulder isn't about aesthetics. It's about harassment. And I'm done letting you get away with it. And she smirked, her tone mocking. Mr. Carter, if you can't handle the rules, perhaps Oak Ridge isn't the place for you. And that was it, the last straw. So I pulled out a folder from my briefcase. My movements deliberate as I walked to the front of the room, the crowd murmuring as I faced them. I think it's time everyone here knows the truth. I'm not just a resident of Oak Ridge. I own 40% of the land in this development, through my company, Carter Holdings. And I've kept that quiet for years because I wanted a normal life for my daughter. But I'm also a billionaire, and I'm not going to let you, Barbara, or anyone else, push me out of my own home. And the room went silent, a stunned hush falling over the crowd as Barbara's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find words. And I held up the property deeds, passing copies to the stunned board members. These documents prove my ownership, which means I have a say in what happens here. And I'm starting by demanding that boulder be removed immediately. And the crowd erupted, whispers turning into shouts, some neighbors looking at me with newfound respect, others with suspicion. One man in the back yelling, "If he's so rich, why is he even here? This sounds like a power grab." And Barbara seized on that, her voice shrill as she regained her composure. "This is exactly what I warned you about. He's trying to take over Oak Ridge, using his money to intimidate us. We can't let him destroy our community." But I wasn't backing down. My eyes locked on hers as I said, "The only one destroying this community is you, Barbara, with your racism and your power trips. I've lived here for 3 years, and all I've heard is how I don't belong because I'm black. But I'm not going anywhere, and neither is that boulder unless I say so." And I saw Mrs. Jackson stand up, her voice trembling but firm. "He's right. Barbara, you've been targeting people like us for years, My grandkids can't even visit without you finding me. It's time for a change. And the Martinezes joined in, their voices rising. We've been harassed too. Enough is enough. And I felt a surge of hope because I wasn't alone anymore. But Barbara wasn't done, her face twisting with rage as she slammed her gavel on the podium. This meeting is adjourned. We'll deal with this legally. Mr. Carter, you'll regret dragging your money into this. And she stormed out, her allies trailing behind her. But I could see the cracks forming. Neighbors who'd once supported her now whispering among themselves, their eyes darting to me. And as the room cleared, Mrs. Jackson grabbed my arm, her voice low. Darius, you've got us behind you, but Barbara's not going to stop. She's got the board in her pocket, and she'll fight dirty. And I nodded, my mind already racing, because I knew she was right. Barbara wasn't going to let this go. She'd built her little empire on control, on keeping people like me in their place. And now that I'd challenged her, she'd come after me with everything she had. So I called Michael, my lawyer, as soon as I got home. My voice urgent. She's going to try to sue me. I need you to be ready and keep digging into that LLC, Oak Ridge Innovations. I know it's tied to her. And Michael's tone was serious. I've already got a lead. Darius, the LLC is registered to her brother-in-law, and there's more. I'll have a full report by tomorrow. And as I hung up, I looked out my window at that boulder, still sitting there like a giant middle finger from Barbara. But now I felt a fire in my chest. Because I wasn't just fighting for my driveway anymore. I was fighting for justice. For every family in Oak Ridge who'd been made to feel like they didn't belong. And I knew the battle was just beginning, because Barbara was about to find out what happens when you underestimate a man who spent his life building an empire. A man who wasn't afraid to use every resource he had to tear down hers. Mom, the revelation of my identity as a billionaire and major landowner in Oak Ridge Estates sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. But I, Darius Carter, knew that Barbara Evans wouldn't let my challenge to her authority go unanswered. And I was right. Because the very next morning, I woke up to a barrage of emails and notifications, a smear campaign in full swing, with Barbara posting in the Oak Ridge online group, claiming I was abusing my wealth to undermine the community, and accusing me of intimidating residents and trying to buy control of the HOA. And she didn't stop there, because by noon, I received a certified letter from her lawyer, a formal notice of intent to sue me for defamation and interference with community governance, demanding I retract my statements from the meeting and pay $100,000 in damages for emotional distress to the HOA board. And I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity, because here I was, a black man who'd been harassed with a giant boulder in front of my house, now being painted as the villain by a woman who'd built her power on racism and corruption. But I knew this wasn't a joke. Barbara was playing hardball, and she was good at it, because I started noticing the shift in the neighborhood. Some residents who'd been on the fence now avoiding me, their eyes darting away when I waved, while others, like Mrs. Henderson, one of Barbara's loyalists, openly confronted me at the grocery store, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. You think you can just throw your money around and ruin our neighborhood? We don't want your kind here, taking over everything. And I felt the sting of her words, the same racist undertone I'd heard too many times. But I kept my composure, my voice calm. Mrs. Henderson, I'm not taking over. I'm fighting for what's right. Maybe you should ask Barbara why she's so afraid of the truth. And I walked away, my heart pounding, because I knew Barbara was turning Oak Ridge into a battlefield. But I wasn't fighting alone anymore, because Mrs. Jackson and the Martinezes had rallied other families who'd been targeted by the HOA, like the Thompsons, a mixed-race couple who'd been fined for their daughter's lemonade stand, and the Nguyen's, a Vietnamese family who'd been forced to remove a Buddhist statue from their yard because Barbara called it inappropriate. And we met at my house that night, a small but determined group, sitting around my dining table as I laid out the situation. Barbara's coming after me hard. She's suing me, spreading lies, trying to turn everyone against us. But we've got the truth on our side, and I've got resources. I'm not backing down." And Mrs. Jackson nodded, her voice fierce. "Neither are we, Darius. She's been terrorizing us for years. It's time she paid for it." And Mr. Nguyen added, "We've got your back, but we need more people. We need to show the neighborhood she's the real problem." And I agreed, so we planned to go door to door, to talk to every resident we could, to share our stories, to show them the boulder wasn't just about me, it was about the kind of control Barbara wanted over all of us. And as we canvassed the next day, I felt a mix of hope and frustration, because some neighbors listened, like the Wilsons, a white couple who admitted they'd been uncomfortable with Barbara's tactics for years, while others slammed their doors, one man shouting, "I don't care who you are. I trust Barbara. She keeps this place nice. You're the one causing trouble." And I knew Barbara's propaganda was working, but what I didn't expect was her next move. Because that evening, I got a call from Michael, my lawyer, his voice tense. "Darius, we've got a problem. Barbara's filed an emergency injunction to freeze your voting rights in the HOA, claiming you're using your land ownership to coerce the board, and she's got a judge on her side, a friend of her husband's. We've got a hearing tomorrow." And I felt my stomach drop, because this was a power play, a way to silence me before I could expose her. But I also knew I had an ace up my sleeve, because Michael had been digging into Oak Ridge Innovations, the LLC tied to the boulder, and he'd found gold. "Darius, the LLC isn't just owned by her brother-in-law. It's a shell company, and we've traced payments from it to Barbara's personal account, over $80,000 in the last 2 years. She's been siphoning HOA funds for herself." And I felt a surge of adrenaline, because this was the proof we needed. So I told Michael, "Get everything ready for the hearing. We're not just defending, we're going on the attack. She's going to regret this." And as I hung up, I looked out at that boulder, still blocking my driveway, a constant reminder of Barbara's hatred. But now I saw it differently, as a symbol of her downfall, because she'd underestimated me, thinking I was just another black man she could push around. But I was more than that. I was a billionaire with the resources to fight back. And I was going to use every bit of my power to bring her down, not just for me, but for Mrs. Jackson, for the Martinezes, for every family in Oak Ridge who'd been made to feel like they didn't belong. And as I prepared for the hearing, I knew this was about to get uglier, because Barbara was fighting for her survival, and I was fighting for justice, and only one of us could win. The morning of the court hearing dawned with a tension that hung over Oak Ridge Estates like a storm cloud. And I, Darius Carter, stood in front of my mirror, adjusting my tie, my mind racing with the stakes of the day, because I knew this wasn't just about the boulder blocking my driveway anymore. It was about exposing Barbara Evans for the corrupt, racist tyrant she was. And as I drove to the courthouse, the giant rock still looming in front of my house, I felt a fire in my chest. Because I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every family in this neighborhood who'd been targeted by her prejudice. And I arrived to find the courtroom packed, not just with lawyers and HOA board members, but with residents of Oak Ridge, some on my side, like Mrs. Jackson and the Martinezes, their faces set with determination, while others, like Mrs. Henderson, sat behind Barbara, their arms crossed, their eyes cold, and Barbara herself stood at the front, her green blazer as sharp as her smirk, her lawyer, a slick man in a pinstripe suit, arguing to the judge that I was using my wealth to intimidate the HOA, claiming my ownership of 40% of the land gave me all undue influence, and that my voting rights should be frozen to protect the community. And I felt my blood boil as I listened to their lies, but I kept my composure, waiting for my turn. And when Michael, my lawyer, stood to speak, he didn't hold back, his voice steady as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, Mr. Carter has been the victim of targeted harassment by the HOA. This boulder was placed in front of his home without proper approval, and we have evidence that Ms. Evans has been using HOA funds for personal gain." And he held up a thick folder, passing copies to the judge and Barbara's team. "These financial records show that Oak Ridge Innovations, The LLC responsible for the boulder is a shell company owned by Ms. Evans' brother-in-law, and over $80,000 in HOA fees were funneled to her personal account through this company. This isn't about community standards. This is about corruption. And the courtroom erupted, gasps and murmurs filling the air as Barbara's face turned red, her lawyer scrambling to respond. But Michael wasn't done. We've also uncovered fines and violations disproportionately targeting minority families. Mrs. Jackson was fined $500 for excessive visitors when her grandchildren visited. The Martinezes were forced to repaint their home. The Nguyen's had to remove a cultural statue. This is a pattern of racial discrimination, and Ms. Evans is at the center of it. And I saw the judge's eyes narrow, his expression darkening as he turned to Barbara. Ms. Evans, these are serious allegations, and what do you have to say for yourself? And Barbara stood, her voice shaking but defiant. This is a fabrication. Your Honor, Mr. Carter is using his money to slander me. I've dedicated years to keeping Oak Ridge a respectable community. He's the one causing division with his accusations. But the judge wasn't buying it, his tone sharp. I'll be the one to decide that. I'm ordering a full audit of the HOA's finances. And until then, Mr. Carter's voting rights remain intact. As for the boulder, it's to be removed immediately. This court will not tolerate harassment. And I felt a wave of relief, the crowd behind me cheering. Mrs. Jackson grabbing my hand with a tearful smile. But Barbara wasn't done, her eyes blazing as she leaned toward me, her voice a venomous whisper. You think this is over, Carter? I'll make sure you regret this. You and your little allies. And I stared her down, my voice low. Try me, Barbara. I've got more where that came from. And as the hearing adjourned, I knew the real battle was just beginning, because that night I called another community meeting at the center. This time with every resident invited, and the room was packed. Over 100 people filling the seats, their faces a mix of anger and curiosity as I took the podium, my voice carrying over the crowd. What happened in court today was just the start. Barbara and the HOA have been stealing from us, targeting families like mine, like the Jacksons, the Martinezes, because of our race. But we're not going to let them win. Here's the proof. And I held up the financial records, projecting them on a screen, showing the $80,000 payments to Barbara's account, the fake invoices, the discriminatory fines, and the crowd erupted again. Shouts of, she's a thief, and we trusted her, echoing through the room. And even Mrs. Henderson, Barbara's staunchest ally, stood up, her voice trembling. Is this true, Barbara? Did you really take our money? And Barbara, who'd shown up hoping to salvage her reputation, faltered, her voice weak. I did what was best for Oak Ridge. You don't understand. But no one was listening anymore, because the truth was out, and I saw the tide turning. Neighbors who'd once sided with her now turning away, their faces hard with betrayal, and I knew this was our moment. So I continued. We deserve better. Oak Ridge should be a place for everyone, not just the people Barbara deems worthy. I'm calling for her resignation and a new election for the HOA board. Who's with me? And the room roared in agreement, hands shooting up as Mrs. Jackson and the Martinezes led the charge. And I felt a surge of hope, because we were finally taking Oak Ridge back. But I also knew Barbara wouldn't go quietly. And as she slipped out the back door, her face a mask of fury, I braced myself for what she'd do next, because this fight was far from over. The fallout from the community meeting rippled through Oak Ridge Estates like a tidal wave, and I, Darius Carter, could feel the momentum shifting in our favor. But I knew Barbara Evans wasn't the type to go down without a fight. And I was right, because the very next day, as the crew arrived to remove the boulder from my driveway, I received a new legal notice. This time a full-blown lawsuit from Barbara, accusing me of conspiracy to defame and unlawful interference with HOA operations, claiming I'd orchestrated a hostile takeover of Oak Ridge by leveraging my wealth and land ownership. and she was seeking $500,000 in damages, along with an injunction to reinstate her as HOA president. And I felt a mix of anger and determination as I read the filing, because this was her last desperate stand, a final attempt to cling to power. But I also knew I had the upper hand, because the truth was on my side, and so was the community. So I called Michael, my lawyer, my voice steady. "She's suing us for $500,000, Michael. But we've got the financial records, the discriminatory fines. Let's hit her back hard." And Michael's tone was confident. "We're ready. Darius, I've already filed a counterclaim for harassment, racial discrimination, and financial misconduct. We're going to bury her in court." And as the boulder was finally lifted from my driveway, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, my Bentley rolling into the garage for the first time in weeks. But I knew the real battle was still ahead, because the court date was set for the following week, and Barbara was pulling out all the stops, rallying her remaining allies, spreading rumors that I was planning to turn Oak Ridge into a commercial zone with my billionaire agenda. And I saw the fear in some neighbors' eyes, the ones who still clung to her lies. But I also saw the hope in others, like Mrs. Jackson, who'd started a petition for a new HOA election, gathering signatures from over half the neighborhood, and the Martinezes, who'd been hosting small gatherings to share their own stories of Barbara's harassment. And I joined them, going door to door, my voice earnest as I said, "I'm not here to take over. I'm here to make Oak Ridge a place where everyone belongs, where we're not judged by our race or our bank accounts." And slowly more residents came around, even Mrs. Henderson, who showed up at my door one evening, her voice quiet. "I was wrong about you, Darius. I believed Barbara because I was scared of change. But I see what you're doing. I want to help." And I nodded, grateful for her honesty, because every ally mattered. And when the court date arrived, I walked into the courtroom with Michael by my side, the room packed with Oak Ridge residents, the tension thick as Barbara sat at the plaintiff's table, her face a mask of defiance. Her lawyer arguing that I'd fabricated evidence to destroy her reputation. But Michael was ready, presenting the financial records, the shell company payments, the discriminatory fines, and even testimony from Mrs. Jackson and the Martinezes, who spoke about the years of harassment they'd endured. And I saw the judge's expression darken as he listened, his voice sharp as he turned to Barbara. "Ms. Evans, these records show clear evidence of financial misconduct, and the pattern of targeting minority families is undeniable. Do you have any defense for this?" And Barbara stammered, her voice shaking. I was protecting Oak Ridge. Your Honor. These people, they don't fit our standards. I had to maintain order." And I felt the room gasp, her own words damning her as the judge's gavel came down. "Ms. Evans, your actions constitute fraud and discrimination. This lawsuit is dismissed, and I'm ordering you to pay restitution to the HOA for the misappropriated funds. You are permanently barred from serving on the board, and I strongly suggest you settle with Mr. Carter to avoid further legal consequences." And the courtroom erupted in cheers, Mrs. Jackson hugging me as tears streamed down her face. And I looked at Barbara, her face pale, her empire crumbling around her, and I felt a strange mix of triumph and relief, because this wasn't just a win for me. It was a win for every family who'd been made to feel less than in Oak Ridge. And as we left the courthouse, I saw the news vans outside, the story spreading beyond our neighborhood, a headline already flashing on my phone. "Billionaire exposes racist HOA in Oak Ridge Estates." And I knew this was bigger than I'd imagined. So I called a final community meeting that night, the room overflowing with residents as I took the podium, my voice steady. "Today, we took back Oak Ridge. Barbara's gone, the boulder's gone, and we're going to build something better. An HOA that works for all of us, not against us. But this isn't the end. We have to keep fighting for justice, for equality, because what happened here can't happen again." And the crowd roared, hands shooting up to volunteer for the new board. And I felt a hand on my shoulder, Mrs. Henderson's voice soft. "You've changed this place, Darius. Thank you." And as I looked out at the faces, Black, Latino, Asian, white, all united, I knew we'd won more than a lawsuit. We'd won a future. But I also knew Barbara's defeat wouldn't erase all the prejudice in Oak Ridge overnight. And I was ready for that challenge, because this was my home, and I wasn't going anywhere. With Barbara Evans out of the picture, Oak Ridge Estates felt like a neighborhood reborn, and I, Darius Carter, stood at the forefront of that change. Not because I wanted power, but because I wanted justice. Not just for myself, but for every family who'd been made to feel unwelcome here. And the morning after the court ruling, I woke up to the sound of laughter outside my window, a sound I hadn't heard in months, and I looked out to see kids playing on the street, their bikes weaving around the spot where the boulder once stood, my driveway finally clear, my Bentley parked where it belonged. And I smiled, because this was what I'd been fighting for, a place where my daughter Kyla and her friends could be kids without fear. But I knew the work wasn't done. So I gathered the newly elected HOA board, a diverse group that included Mrs. Jackson, Mr. Martinez, and even Mrs. Henderson, who'd come around after seeing the truth about Barbara. And we met at the community center, our voices united as we drafted new bylaws. Rules that banned discriminatory fines, allowed cultural expressions like the Nguyen's Buddhist statue, and prioritized transparency. Every budget line item now public. Every decision voted on by the community. And we didn't stop there. I proposed using some of my own funds to create a community space, a park where kids of all races could play, with a basketball court, a playground, and a garden for families to grow whatever they wanted. And the board approved it unanimously, the park breaking ground within weeks. And I watched as Oak Ridge transformed. The once sterile streets now buzzing with life. Black kids, Latino kids, Asian kids, white kids running through the park together, their parents chatting on benches, sharing stories of the old days under Barbara's reign. And I felt a swell of pride. Because this was what community looked like. But not everyone was ready to embrace the change. Because a small group of Barbara's old allies, led by a man named Mr. Reynolds, started grumbling at meetings, their voices low but pointed. This place is turning into a free-for-all. We moved here for standards, not this. And I knew what they meant by this. They meant the diversity, the inclusivity, the fact that Oak Ridge wasn't their exclusive little enclave anymore. And I saw the way they looked at me, their eyes narrowing when I spoke. But I didn't let it deter me. Instead, I invited them to the park's opening ceremony, hoping to show them what we'd built. And to my surprise, Mr. Reynolds showed up, his face tight as he watched the kids play. But when Kyla ran up to him, offering him a flower from the garden, his expression softened, and he muttered, "Maybe this isn't so bad." And I knew change was slow, but it was happening. And I kept pushing, organizing workshops on racial equity, bringing in speakers to talk about the history of discrimination in housing. And I saw minds opening, even Mrs. Henderson volunteering to lead a session, her voice shaky but sincere. I was wrong. I let fear guide me, but Darius showed me what Oak Ridge could be. And I felt a lump in my throat, because this was the real victory, not just removing the boulder, but changing hearts. And we held a barbecue to celebrate the new HOA, the park filled with families from every corner of the neighborhood, the smell of grilled chicken and cornbread in the air as music played. And I watched Kyla dance with her friends, her laughter a reminder of why I'd fought so hard. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Barbara's shadow still lingered, because Marcus, my journalist friend, called me that evening, his voice low. "Darius, I heard Barbara's been talking to some developers. She might be trying to sell her property to a company that wants to gentrify Oak Ridge, push out the families you've been fighting for." And I felt my stomach twist, because I knew what that meant. Gentrification would drive up prices, force out the Jacksons, the Martinezes, the Nguyen's, the very people I'd fought to protect. So I called an emergency board meeting, my voice urgent. We can't let this happen. I'll use my ownership to block any sales that threaten our community. But we need to be proactive. Let's start a fund to help families afford to stay. And we'll push for zoning laws to protect Oak Ridge. And the board agreed at us. Jackson's eyes fierce. We've come too far to lose this now. Darius, we're with you. And I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Because this wasn't just about fixing the past, it was about securing the future. And as the weeks passed, we lobbied the county to pass protections. My wealth giving us a voice in rooms we'd never been allowed in before. And I saw Oak Ridge grow stronger, the park becoming a symbol of what we'd achieved. A place where differences didn't divide us, but brought us together. And I knew the fight for equality would never truly end, but we'd laid a foundation, one that could withstand whatever came next. Because Oak Ridge wasn't just my home, it was our home, and I'd never stop fighting for it. The months that followed the barbecue marked a turning point for Oak Ridge Estates, and I, Darius Carter, stood on the edge of the community park I'd helped build, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the basketball court where kids of every race laughed and played. Their voices a symphony of joy that felt like a victory in itself, because this was what I'd fought for. A neighborhood where my daughter Kyla and her friends could grow up without the shadow of racism hanging over them. And as I looked around, I saw the fruits of our labor, the garden blooming with tomatoes and marigolds, the playground buzzing with activity, and the new HOA office, a small building we'd converted from Barbara's old violation center, now a place where residents could come for help, not fines. And I felt a deep sense of pride. Because Oak Ridge wasn't just a place to live anymore, it was a community, one that had been forged through struggle and unity. But I knew that victory hadn't come without its challenges. Because Barbara's final act of revenge had been a close call, her attempt to sell her property to a developer who wanted to gentrify Oak Ridge, to turn it into a luxury enclave that would price out the Jacksons, the Martinezes, the Nguyens, the very families who'd fought alongside me. But I'd use my 40% ownership to block the sale, working with the county to pass zoning laws that protected our neighborhood from predatory development, and we'd set up a fund to help families afford their homes, ensuring that no one would be pushed out. And I watched as those families thrived. Mrs. Jackson starting a community cooking class in the park, teaching kids how to make her famous peach cobbler, the Martinezes hosting a soccer tournament that drew families from all over Atlanta. And even Mrs. Henderson, once Barbara's fiercest ally, now leading a book club that read stories about civil rights, her eyes opening to the history she'd once ignored. And I knew change wasn't just in the new rules or the park, it was in the hearts of the people, because Oak Ridge had become a place where differences were celebrated, not feared, where a black billionaire like me could stand side by side with a working-class family like the Nguyens, and we could all call this place home. But I also knew the fight for equality was far from over, because racism doesn't disappear overnight. And I saw it in the small things, the occasional side eye from a new resident who didn't know our story, the whispers at the grocery store about how things used to be. But I also saw hope in the way Kyla and her friends played without fear, in the way Mrs. Henderson apologized to Mrs. Jackson for her past prejudice, her voice trembling as she said, "I didn't understand then, but I do now." And I knew those moments were the real legacy of our battle. So I poured my energy into making Oak Ridge a beacon, using my wealth to fund scholarships for local kids, to sponsor cultural festivals that celebrated every heritage in our neighborhood. And I worked with the new HOA to advocate for fair housing policies across Atlanta, because what happened in Oak Ridge couldn't be isolated. It had to be a movement, and it was, because the story of the billionaire who took down a racist HOA spread far and wide, inspiring other communities to stand up, to fight back. And I got letters from people I'd never met, black families, Latino families, Asian families, all saying, "You gave us hope." And I kept every one of those letters, a reminder of why I'd fought in the first place. And as the one-year anniversary of the boulder's removal approached, we held a celebration in the park. The entire neighborhood coming together for a festival, with music and food and laughter. And I stood at the podium, my voice steady as I addressed the crowd. A year ago, a boulder stood in front of my house, a symbol of hate. But today, we stand here united, a symbol of what's possible when we fight for justice. Oak Ridge isn't perfect, but it's ours, and we'll keep making it better, together. And the crowd cheered, Kyla running up to hug me, her smile brighter than the sun. And as I looked out at the faces, Black, Latino, Asian, white, all part of this new Oak Ridge, I thought about Barbara, who'd moved to another suburb, her dreams of power shattered. And I heard she'd tried to join another HOA, but they'd turned her away, her reputation preceding her, and I didn't feel vindictive. I felt at peace. Because the real revenge wasn't in her downfall. It was in the thriving community she tried to destroy. And as the festival wound down, I sat with Mrs. Jackson, her voice soft. Darius, you changed everything. You showed us what we could be. And I smiled, because I knew she was right. But I also knew it wasn't just me. It was all of us, fighting together. And as I watched the last of the sunset fade, I knew Oak Ridge would never be the same, and neither would I. Because this fight had taught me that true change starts with standing up, with refusing to be silenced. And I'd never stop standing up for my daughter, for my community, for a world where everyone belongs. Darius, a billionaire, defeated a racist HOA, removed the boulder, and united Oak Ridge for equality. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you love this story. Hit the bell for our latest videos on justice and HOA battles. You won't want to miss what's next.